Few sayings in the Hebrew Bible are as compact and as persistently contested as Proverbs chapter 10, verse 2. Its familiar formulation appears straightforward. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivers from death. Yet beneath this apparent clarity lies a long history of interpretive divergence. Jewish, Christian, medieval, and modern readers have all found the verse compelling, but rarely in the same way, and almost never with the same conclusions about what it is ultimately saying. At issue is not merely nuance, but emphasis. For some, the proverb speaks primarily about unjust wealth and its instability. For others, it becomes a statement about charity, where righteousness is concretely realized in almsgiving that delivers from death. Still others read it as an expression of moral order, in which actions carry inherent consequences within the fabric of reality. In theological traditions, the verse is often drawn into discussions of divine judgment or salvation, where death becomes not only a temporal danger, but an ultimate boundary condition. Even within a single tradition, the interpretive center of gravity can shift. What one commentator treats as practical wisdom, another treats as eschatological warning. These differences are not superficial. They reflect real tensions about how the key terms are to be understood, and more importantly, how they are related. Does the proverb describe a general pattern of life, or a decisive moment of judgment? Is righteousness a specific act, a moral quality, or an orientation toward God? Does death refer to immediate danger, social collapse, or ultimate loss? And perhaps most fundamentally, does the verse assert a simple contrast between good and evil, or does it encode a more complex account of how value and outcome are connected? The persistence of these questions suggests that the difficulty is not imposed from outside, but generated from within the text itself. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 2 is highly compressed. Its terms do not function as isolated units, whose meanings can be settled independently, and then assembled into a finished proposition. Instead, each term draws its force from its relation to the others. Treasures, profit, wickedness, righteousness, deliverance, and death do not merely appear side by side. They interact. The verse therefore does not present a fully elaborated doctrinal statement so much as a tightly structured sequence whose meaning emerges through contrast, interruption, and progression. One important stage in the history of interpretation was the attempt to fix the verse more tightly through the addition of vowels to produce the Masoretic vocalization. Vocalization did not invent the meaning of the consonantal text, but it did reduce the range of live possibilities by assigning a more determinate grammatical shape to forms that, in their unpointed state, required greater interpretive participation. This was a necessary and often illuminating act of preservation, but it also nudged readers toward receiving the verse as a settled sentence rather than as a compact structure of interacting terms. Later translations, especially into English, intensified that tendency. In many cases, translators did not merely render the Hebrew, they clarified it in advance according to preferred theological assumptions. One version makes righteousness sound like moral integrity in general, another subtly steers it toward almsgiving, another frames the whole proverb as eschatological warning, and another as practical wisdom about life under God's providence. Each such rendering narrows ambiguity, but often by building interpretation into the surface of the text. The earlier consonantal form invites a different mode of reading. Because it does not overdetermine the relation among the semantic units, it encourages the reader to ask how meaning is generated through linkage rather than simply extracted from a finished doctrinal statement. In that form, the verse is especially suited to structural analysis. The terms do not merely accumulate, they constrain one another. Negation modifies efficacy, efficacy tests stored value, distortion is set against alignment, alignment is validated by deliverance, and the final boundary of death judges which type of process actually holds. Under such conditions, meaning is not located only in any single word, but in the movement among them. This does not make the text vague. On the contrary, it makes the text precise at a deeper level, because the precision lies in relational dynamics rather than in forced lexical narrowing. The opening cluster, low meaning not, Yoilu meaning will avail or benefit, and otrot meaning treasures, is often read as if it simply states that wealth is useless. But in the consonantal sequence, the terms do more than produce a moral maxim. Lo is not just a grammatical negative. It introduces negation as an active force, the power by which a projected outcome is denied or emptied. Yoilu does not name intrinsic worth, but instrumentality. What avails, what proves useful, what yields a result. Otrot names stored reserve, treasure amassed and held. Taken together, the triad does not merely ask whether wealth works. It asks what kind of world emerges when value is imagined primarily in terms of usefulness and accumulation under the shadow of negation. The deepest relational insight is that negation is not merely imposed from outside upon treasure. It is already internal to the logic of instrumentality. To ask what avails is already to divide the world into what counts and what does not, what is retained and what is discarded. In that sense, Lo haunts Yoilu from within. And once life is measured by usefulness, accumulation follows naturally. Otrot is the frozen form of instrumental thinking, value stored because it may later produce advantage. Yet accumulation itself is also a form of negation, since what is hoarded is withdrawn from present flow and denied to shared use. The triad therefore forms a closed relation. Negation conditions instrumentality. Instrumentality drives accumulation, and accumulation materializes negation. This turns the phrase into an interior critique of the accumulating imagination. The problem is not only that treasure may fail at some future crisis. The deeper problem is that the whole paradigm of what avails is already shaped by lack, fear, exclusion, and withholding. One hoards because one feels the threat of insufficiency, one measures because one fears waste or loss. But the more accumulation becomes the remedy, the more it reproduces the very void it seeks to master. Otrot promises security, yet its existence testifies to the world of scarcity and control from which it arose. The negation at the head of the triad is thus not just the final verdict, but the hidden ground of the system from the beginning. That is why structural logic is especially revealing here. Under coexistence, negation, instrumentality, and accumulation imply one another. Usefulness depends on exclusion, and hoarding makes that exclusion concrete. In a reinforcement pattern, negation drives the search for what avails, which drives accumulation, which in turn deepens anxiety, scarcity, and denial. Under causal logic, accumulation appears as the downstream product of a world already governed by lack, a state that would not occur without that initial condition. Across these readings, the same point persists. The triad is not merely about wealth failing at the boundary. It is about a whole economy of thought in which the drive to secure life through stored utility is itself structured by negation. This also clarifies why later exegesis, though varied, repeatedly converged on crisis, judgment, or ultimate failure. Rabbinic readings often locate the breakdown of treasure at a decisive boundary. Patristic writers such as Chrysostom and Augustine intensify the point by arguing that wealth ordered wrongly is already corrupted inwardly. Scholastic and Reformation interpreters often grant treasure provisional utility while denying it final efficacy. These are not contradictory readings. They are different ways of recognizing the same structural truth. The world of Lo, Yoilu, and Otrot is not simply a world where wealth sometimes fails, but a world where accumulation cannot finally save because it is already governed by the negation it seeks to overcome. The second cluster, Resha, wickedness, Utstaka, and/or but righteousness, Tatsil, delivers or saves, is often reduced to a simple moral contrast, evil on one side, virtue on the other. But the sequence is more relational than that. Resha is not merely bad behavior. It names distortion, rupture, a condition in which life is bent out of right relation and becomes exposed to harm and fragmentation. Tzedakah is more than moral decency. It is rightness, alignment, a principle of restored fit that may appear as inner rectitude, social justice, or fidelity to divine order. Tatsil is not a passive reward attached to righteousness. It is an act of extraction, a movement of release, an opening of passage where life had become trapped. The triad therefore describes not a static contrast, but a dynamic system in which disorder, rightness, and rescue define one another. The first crucial relation is between Resha and Tzedakah. Wickedness and righteousness are not merely opposites lying side by side. Each becomes intelligible in relation to the other. Distortion is recognized as distortion only against the pressure of a norm of rightness, and rightness becomes historically meaningful, not in abstraction, but as an active response to disorder. In that sense, Tzedakah does not simply append a second term. It marks the emergence of a counter-principle within the field opened by Resha. The verse moves from disorder to answering alignment, not as though righteousness floats above history, but as though it arises precisely where distortion has become manifest. The second crucial relation is between Tzedakah and Tatzil. Righteousness is not merely praised, it is shown to be operative. Deliverance is not something added later to righteousness from outside. Rather, righteousness becomes real by becoming liberative. If Tzedakah is right alignment, then Tatzil is alignment in motion, rightness acting with extractive force. This also works in reverse. Deliverance gives concrete reality to righteousness, without some power to open a path through distortion. Righteousness risks remaining formal, admirable, but inert. In the triad's deepest logic, righteousness proves itself precisely by becoming deliverance. The relation between Resha and Tatzil adds the paradox that makes the whole cluster dynamic. Wickedness is not redemptive, but it creates the field in which deliverance becomes meaningful. Constraint gives meaning to release. Rupture gives meaning to rescue. Without distortion, deliverance would remain a latent possibility rather than a manifest event. This does not sanctify evil, but it does mean that the triad treats salvation as historically dramatic rather than abstractly static. Deliverance does not descend into a vacuum. It arises where disorder has made liberation necessary. The emergent concept, then, is not simply goodness overcoming evil, but restorative alignment as the only force that can extract life from distortion. This is why the exegetical traditions, though different in vocabulary, circle the same structure. Rabbinic readings that hear tzedakah as charity or enacted justice are identifying a concrete social form of liberating alignment. Where Resha produces deprivation or imbalance, tzedakah becomes tatzil in action. Augustinian and related theological readings shift the register upward, treating righteousness as alignment with God or with the true order of being, but the structure is unchanged. Calvin and similar interpreters ground the efficacy of righteousness in divine governance itself. In each case, the same triadic logic holds. Resha names the field of distortion, tzedakah names the answering order, and tatzil names the release that occurs when rightness actively confronts what has gone wrong. The final triad gathers the two emergent concepts and places them under the pressure of the verse's last word. From the first triad comes misalignment, the closed economy of negation, instrumentality, and accumulation. From the second comes deliverance, the active force of righteous alignment. The final term, mimavet, from death, now brings both into judgment. Death here need not be restricted to one narrow meaning. It can include literal death, catastrophe, futility, communal collapse, divine judgment, or ultimate estrangement. What matters structurally is that mimavet names the terminal horizon, the condition of closure under which the earlier systems are shown for what they really are. The verse therefore moves beyond a contrast between bad wealth and good morality. It stages a redemptive passage in which misalignment tends toward death, and deliverance proves itself by opening a way through it. The most important relation is between misalignment and deliverance. Deliverance is meaningful only where something has gone wrong. The first triad exposed a world that cannot save itself because it is already organized by lack and false security. The second introduced the only force capable of breaking that system. Misalignment here is not mere error. It is fracture become existentially consequential, a way of living that cannot overcome the void it is built to manage. Deliverance, therefore, does not appear as an ornament added to life otherwise whole. It awakens because misalignment has made rescue necessary. Without deliverance, misalignment becomes terminal. With deliverance, its finality is broken. The next decisive relation is between deliverance and mimavet. Deliverance becomes fully legible only as movement out of death. The preposition matters. The verse says not simply death, but from death. Salvation is thus not merely protection within life, but passage through closure. Mimavet names the point at which continuity has failed, where no merely accumulative or instrumental strategy can carry life further. Deliverance proves itself real precisely because it crosses that boundary. It does not merely resist death from outside, it opens a way through the terminal condition that misalignment could not survive. The relation between misalignment and mimavet completes the structure. Misalignment, left unresolved, tends toward death. A life governed by negation, hoarding, and distorted utility does not remain neutral. It hardens into futility, separation, and ruin. Death is therefore not an arbitrary punishment externally imposed. It is the terminal disclosure of the first system. Yet, from death also bears witness to what came before it. One does not emerge from death without having entered the field where death became the horizon. Salvation, then, is not forgetfulness. It carries memory. To come from death is to bear the truth that misalignment was real, that the threat was real, and that deliverance was costly. This, again, clarifies the line of exegesis. Rabbinic interpreters often read mimavet concretely as danger, judgment, or catastrophe. Christian theological traditions widen it into final estrangement or eternal death. Modern interpreters often preserve its polyvalence as the general limit at which human systems are tested. These readings differ in scale, not in structure. All ask the same question: what can actually carry life through closure? The answer given by the verse is consistent across them. The system of misalignment born of Lo, Yo'ilu, and Otzrot tends toward death. The system of aligned deliverance named by Resha, Tastaka, and Tatsil alone opens the passage mimavet. Death is not just the last obstacle in the verse. It is the revealing horizon in which the difference between the two economies becomes unmistakable. A structural reading of Proverbs 10:2 does not erase doctrinal interpretation, nor does it flatten the real differences among rabbinic, patristic, scholastic, Reformation, and modern readings. What it does is identify the level at which those readings cease to compete destructively and begin to illuminate one another. Each tradition tends to privilege a different point within the same pattern. Some emphasize how righteousness is enacted in concrete life, some what righteousness ultimately is, some where the decisive boundary of death or judgment should be located, and some how provisional goods differ from ultimate goods. These are genuine differences, but they are not necessarily contradictions. More often, they are distinct attempts to describe one underlying redemptive dynamic from different angles. That dynamic can now be stated more fully. The verse teaches that what is stored, measured, and controlled cannot be assumed to save simply because it appears effective under ordinary conditions. The whole world of negation, instrumentality, and accumulation is shown to be spiritually unstable. It breeds fear, withholding, and the illusion that security can be manufactured through possession. Against that world stands not mere moral decency in the abstract, but right alignment, a life ordered toward justice, truth, generosity, and fidelity to what is larger than the self. Such alignment alone becomes deliverance, because it alone is capable of opening release where the closed system of self-protection can only tighten further. Death, however understood, is the condition that reveals the difference. It shows whether one has merely managed life, or whether one has entered into the kind of order that can carry life through its deepest crisis. This gives the verse a more concrete spiritual lesson than a simple warning against greed. It asks the reader to examine what kind of logic governs the soul. Do I live by what avails, by what can be counted, secured, stored, and turned to my advantage? If so, then even my apparent strengths may already be shaped by negation, by fear of loss, by distrust of gift and flow. Or do I live by alignment, by the difficult work of right relation to God, neighbor, and truth? The proverb suggests that salvation begins there. It begins where one stops treating life as a problem to be mastered by accumulation and begins allowing righteousness to become active, liberative, and restorative. In that sense, the verse is not only diagnostic, but ascetical. It trains the reader to distrust false securities and to seek the kind of order that can actually deliver. This is also why the verse has remained spiritually fertile across so many traditions. It is structurally generative because it speaks at once to outward conduct and inward disposition. Rabbinic readers can hear in it the call to concrete justice and charity. Christian theologians can hear in it the deeper demand for alignment with the divine life. Moral interpreters can hear a warning against the false promise of wealth. Mystical or existential readers can hear an exposure of the soul's tendency to build storehouses against the void, rather than pass through the void by trust and transformation. All of these are viable because the verse does not merely issue a rule. It reveals an architecture of spiritual life. One path organizes itself around negation and control, and therefore tends toward closure. The other organizes itself around rightness and liberative fidelity, and therefore opens a passage through death. This suggests a broader methodological lesson as well. Structural interpretation can sometimes resolve doctrinal conflict not by choosing one school against another, but by revealing the relational architecture that made multiple schools possible in the first place. In Proverbs 10:2, that architecture is neither vague nor arbitrary. It is exacting, and it reaches beyond interpretation into practice. What fails is not substance as such, but trust in substance as savior. What saves is not sentiment or mere profession, but alignment enacted deeply enough to become deliverance. And what finally matters is not what appears strong while conditions are favorable, but what can cross the limit when the limit arrives. Read this way: the proverb does not simply tell us that righteousness is preferable to wickedness. It teaches that salvation belongs to a different order of life altogether. Not the order of possession, but the order of alignment. Not the logic of securing the self, but the logic of being rightly formed so that, even at the edge of death, life can still be led through.